Hello, this is Christopher Kenworthy and welcome to the Visual Effects Compositing course. We've put in our beams of light now, but I think we need some extra smokiness in here. You have to be careful when adding smoke because although it can create depth and texture, it can also just obliterate the whole image. So we'll add some, but we'll be careful about how we do so. I'm going to go to New Solid, create a black solid. We'll call this Mist 1 and we'll apply fractal noise to that. I'll change this from basic to dynamic and I'll make it 3D. And you can see that's appeared where our 3D layers always appear. So I want to scale it up, hit S, pull the scale up, but then I also want it to come very far forward in the composition. I want it to be close to the camera. So I'll go to 2 views horizontal. So I'm just going to grab the layer and drag it towards the camera like that, and over here I'll move it down. Let's change its blending mode to add, hit T and bring the opacity right down. Go back to 1 view and now you can see the edge of the layer here, so it's not positioned properly, but you can see that as we play through, that smoke and mist is in front of us as we move forward, and we are going to pass through it very soon. As always, I'm going to turn off lots of these layers so that we can see more easily. Now that's in front of us there, but it's still not as close to the camera as I'd like, because I'd quite like to pass through that mist. So I'm just going to get hold of the Z-axis, pull it closer to the camera, and maybe angle it towards us more using the rotation tool. So as I drag through, you can see there we actually pass through it around that point. I think I'd like to pass through it even sooner than that, so I'm going to use the Z arrow again to bring that closer to the camera. And now you can see how we pass through that mist around there. Now because we pass through it, it suddenly flicks off, which isn't good. So at around this point where it's fading out, keyframe the opacity, and then at the point where just before it clicks off, drag the opacity down to 0. And that means that as we pass through it, it'll fade gently. You can even pull this keyframe back so that that happens more smoothly. Now once it's in the right position, it's a good idea to angle it away from the camera. Angle it away from us ever so slightly by dragging down, and now it's just more of a feeling of depth as we pass through it. I'd also like to put some mist in the background, so I'm going to duplicate this layer, call it Mist 2. Go to 2 views. I'm just going to drag it away from the camera like this. I'm dragging over here, but you can see what's happening over here. And that's positioned there in the background. Now I'm going to angle that at a slightly different angle. Hit S to scale that up. And now we need to draw a mask around this. So I'm going to want this to be covering this background area like that. Let's go back to 1 view, feather this heavily, hit T and bring the opacity right down, and I'll add a fast blur to this as well. Now just delete these second 2 opacity keyframes here, and I'll just turn off the visibility for the first mist so we can see how this second one's working. And there, that hovers in the background quite nicely as the whole shot progresses now. I'm going to just drag on the whole thing to make it longer so that the mist goes to the bottom of the frame. And now we have that layer hovering just the way we want in the background. So with those two together, you can see that things do start to get very, very misty very quickly. So at this point, I should turn all the other layers back on and see how it's going to look when everything's together. So if I turn off the foreground mist and look at Mist 2, hit the opacity, I think that can go right down to about 30. And with Mist 1, that's way too bright at this point. So I'll just hit T and I'm going to take that down to about 19, which means I need to come to this second keyframe here and make that 19 as well. And I think perhaps this foreground mist needs a fast blur as well, so I'll add that to Mist 1. Turn that up quite high, and that just takes the edge off that mist and makes it a little less difficult to look at. I'm going to try the screen blending mode as well. Switch to full resolution just to see how that's looking. Remember, we do still have plenty of time to change all this, so I'm not going to keyframe that any more accurately than I have done. And you do have the option to add layers all the way through, lots of different layers that are at different distances from the camera, and that does help to create this sense of depth. So I'm just going to duplicate mist 2, which gives us mist 3, and all I do is hit V, hover over the Z axis, and bring that closer to camera. Then I'm going to hit T and bring its opacity right down. So it could be argued that it's best to do all this work at the very end when you know how everything's going to look. But I like to do it at this point because it just helps to clarify the look you're going to get once you start adding the sparks and when you come to relight. So if you prefer, leave this till the very last stage and you can add it on at the end. But I like to put it in now just so I can see how the shot's developing.